New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, Mind, Body, Spirit University, a leader in fully accredited in-person and online U.S. college degree programs in the topics we cover here. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we'll be exploring miraculous healing. My guest, Joseph Selbie, has been a dedicated Kriya Yoga meditator for over 50 years, following the teachings of the author of Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda. Joseph is author of The Physics of God, How the Deepest Theories of Science Explain Religion, and How the Deepest Truths of Religion Explain Science. His most recent book is The Physics of Miraculous Healing, How Emotion, Mind, and Spirit Enable Unlimited Self-Healing. Joseph lives in California, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Joseph. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey, for having me on your program. I really look forward to our conversation.
Likewise, I think a good starting point is probably that wonderful picture I'm looking at over your, from my point of view, your left shoulder. I think it's your right shoulder from your point of view. That looks like Paramahansa Yogananda, and I know you've been a practitioner of Kriya Yoga for 50 years, so that, I'm sure, has colored your worldview. Could you say a little bit about it?
Yeah, it'd be my pleasure. And you're right, it is Paramahansa Yogananda. And your viewers may recognize him from his famous book, The Autobiography of a Yogi. I came to his teachings a little over 50 years ago and have been practicing meditation since then, particularly Kriya, which is a very powerful pranayama technique. It's really meant to draw subtle energy up through the body, up through the spine, and into the higher centers in the brain. I was drawn to Yogananda, though, not because initially because of kind of the more esoteric side of things, but because he's one of the rare Indian teachers who brings science into his descriptions of the deeper spiritual truths that he's bringing out. And he introduces physics devotes an entire chapter in the Autobiography of a Yogi to that discussion. He introduces many other subjects, disciplines from Western science, but throughout, whether he's directly talking about it or just in his way of presenting, he uses Western scientific concepts and vernacular throughout his teachings and his talks. So I found this made his profound spiritual teachings more understandable, more accessible to me. So it was really a big draw in my connecting with him so long ago.
We've done interviews with other followers of Yogananda's teachings. Ed Close is one such person, a physicist who has done a lot of work relating to physics and consciousness. And for viewers who may be interested, I'll link to that interview in which Ed Close talks about his approach to physics and spirituality via the teachings of Yogananda. In the upper right-hand corner of the screen for viewers who are able to access the link, it'll be there. Your book now, your most recent book, subsequent to your book on the physics of God, is about miraculous healing. And Can you say anything about what drew you to that subject?
So I address miraculous healing as a central theme because it is an anomaly in terms of the field of modern medicine. The underlying systems of modern medicine, biochemistry, molecular biology, and essentially classical physics, can't explain how a human body can change as rapidly as it does in the various verified instances of miraculous healing. And so I see miraculous healing as an anomaly, like unto the speed of light was an anomaly for shifting us from classical physics to relativity and eventually to quantum physics. But medicine hasn't embraced that anomaly, haven't tried to understand it. They kind of, when confronted with the remarkable cases of miraculous healing, they tend to just say, well, life has a way. Life, can explain it. But that's really just kind of ducking the question of why the fundamental scientific disciplines of modern medicine can't explain it. And in a nutshell, they can't explain it because they don't embrace the deeper truths that are embraced by quantum physics and string theory and other more advanced disciplines of physics that are really well established, but medicine just hasn't made the leap.
Let's talk about some examples. I know that you cite in your book a report issued 30 years ago or so through the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where they combed through the medical literature and came up with published cases in the medical literature, cases of spontaneous healings or spontaneous remissions, as they're sometimes called, that were simply unaccountable through normal medical science. 1,500
cases of people recovering from what was considered, and in the most cases still is considered, to be irreversible terminal cancer. There's another 70 cases that come from the archives of the society that keeps track of miraculous healings at Lourdes. And it has a very prestigious board of doctors and scientists who study those cases and only sort of certify those cases if they meet very, very stringent conditions for their veracity. And those 71 cases include one key condition, which is that the healing takes place more or less instantly, and that it remains healed over time. And there are other conditions that are also fascinating, but they had a Nobel Prize winner on that board. They're not sort of Catholic sympathizers, if you will, who want to perpetuate a myth for the Catholic Church. These are very serious scientists who are making these calls as to the veracity of the claim. So there's really, if you take even a little bit of time to look into the literature, there's really no question that there are many verified cases of extraordinarily rapid physical change to be found.
That cannot be accounted for by modern science in any way.
No, modern medicine, modern science, if we include physics, does have explanations for it, but modern medicine cannot account for it because it relies on more matter-centered disciplines of biochemistry, molecular biology, classical physics. And within those disciplines, there are no mechanisms for that speed of change. The laws that govern molecular interaction would indicate that no physical object, let alone the physical body, can undergo that kind of change. And yet it happens. And there are verified cases of it happening. So I think what we have to look at, and what I enjoyed looking at to write the book, were the deeper theories of physics that do offer an explanation for how extraordinarily rapid physical change can take place.
One of the points you make in your book, which I found really fascinating, is that biological science isn't able to account for many of the basic functions of the human body. The fact that if I raise my hand, for example, millions of nerves and cells are all acting in coordination with each other.
Yes, it is. One of the arguments I make is that not only can modern medicine not account for miraculous healing, it really can't account for some continuous functions of the human body without which the human body couldn't exist. And one of those is the coordination of literally quadrillions of biochemical events taking place in the approximately 60 trillion human cells that are perfectly coordinated across the entire body. So everything acts in concert, everything promotes health, everything works together, but there simply is no mechanism that is made of molecules and atoms that could do that. Most people think that must be DNA. But DNA, even in terms of controlling one cell, let alone in terms of controlling or being in concert with the other 60 trillion cells, DNA can't do it. DNA has no mechanisms that even can control the moment by moment biological interactions, particularly the creation of proteins that happen in a cell. And this was proven in the early 2000s with the completion of the examination of the human genome. And they didn't find any genes that could regulate things. Basically, what they found is that all of the DNA that functions in the cell provide blueprints or recipes, if you will, for individual proteins. So the human cell is capable of making up to 2 million different proteins. But when it makes them, and why it makes them, and why it can choose the right proteins to make at this headlong pace of the creation of proteins, and we're talking about 11,000 proteins per second being created in a human cell. There is no mechanism in DNA that can control that. So multiply that times 60 trillion, and you have a human body that's producing sextillion proteins every day without any apparent physical coordination.
And the coordination is essential, or the body wouldn't act in a coherent manner.
Exactly. I mean, we couldn't exist without that coordination. So you have to ask the question, well, where is it? If it's not coming from DNA, it's not coming from the nervous system, say, or the brain. You have to ask that question. And the answer is fascinating, but it's kind of many layers down in the picture that physics provides of how the human body works.
Well, let's go into that a little bit, because I know this is one of your specialties.
Yes, no, I love the way that modern physics, particularly the physics on the frontiers, actually has a deep congruence with spiritual truths that have been around for millennia. So the first thing to realize about the physical body is, even though it is made of atoms and molecules are in fact made of energy. And this is one of the first revolutions that physics made with the theories put forward by Einstein that modern medicine has not come along with, if you will. So what Einstein saw, and it's too complicated to go into in detail, but what he saw in the constancy of the speed of light was that all atoms are made of energy. You could say that atoms and molecules are congealed energy. They're energy moving in the same pattern rather than streaming off into space like the energy we normally think of. And that this underlying reality means that there's a equivalence between matter and energy, that matter is energy, energy is matter. And of more subtle importance is the findings of quantum physics, which came along not long after Einstein's sort of overturning revolutionary papers, is that at any given time, matter can behave, the energy in matter, I should say, can behave like matter, or it can behave like waves of energy. And this is a little bit mind-blowing for most people who haven't encountered it before. But the so-called double-slit experiments, which people may have heard of, that were conducted in the 20s and 30s, indicated that if photons are shot through multiple slits, double slits in this experimental apparatus, they would behave as energy, behave like energy, they behave like waves if they weren't observed, if they weren't measured. But if they were measured, they behave like atoms and molecules. So this has been kind of a like sand in the craw of many material-oriented scientists and physicists, because they've never been able to disprove that if you don't have an intelligent observer, that the energy doesn't behave as matter. So not only does it have this Jekyll-Hyde capability, our consciousness, our awareness, our ability, our intelligent ability to measure it has something to do with how it behaves. So that's kind of the first level of why the body is not what it seems, why the body is not just behaving simply as atoms and molecules. And that is because it's inherently energy. The other thing that is fundamentally different from the classical physics, atom molecule kind of view of the reality around us is that not only does that Jekyll-Hyde behavior occur, but when energy behaves as waves of energy, it moves into what we call now non-local reality. Non-locality is a really odd word. And it evolved because what physicists noticed when they could try to do experiments with light or matter behaving as waves of energy is that it behaved in ways that confound our local behavior, the way things behave in our local universe. And so they began to say that these were non-local effects, non-local behaviors, And perhaps the most famous of those is entanglement. So energy that is behaving as energy can remain entangled until it's observed. And if that energy is in the form of photons, those photons can be literally flying away from each other at the speed of light. But nonetheless, when one of those photons is measured, the other one starts behaving as matter simultaneously. So they're linked, they're connected. And this confounds Einstein's basic theory of relativity, which says that nothing can go faster than the speed of light, including information. So how does the information from photon A get to photon B faster than the speed of light? And the answer is that it's not in the physical world. It's in a non-local realm that obeys other laws. So, and this will perhaps confound your viewers. The implications of this are if your body is not being observed, let's say when you're asleep, then all the energy in your body starts behaving as waves of energy, and you exist in non-locality. But the instant your body is observed, it behaves like physical matter again. Now, this is important to understand because what it implies, the key thing it implies, is that your body can, in fact, in its entirety, behave like energy, can behave like waves of energy. And by doing so, it can change instantly. There's no mechanism, there are no laws in biochemistry or molecular biology or classical physics that can enable that instantaneous, rapid, complete change. But when you get into quantum physics, the door opens for that possibility. Now, there's yet another layer that I love to throw in, also because of its congruence with spiritual teachings that have been around for millennia. And this other layer comes to us from M theory. Now, some people may have heard of M theory. M theory is a discipline within the broader discipline of string theory. And they were both, string theory and M theory, born out of the discovery, the fundamental basis of quantum physics, that there is a lot more energy that has to be present for the laws of quantum physics to work. But we know that the laws of quantum physics do work. So where is all that extra energy? Because the laws of classical physics and the laws of even Einstein's relativity don't require so much energy for them to work. And the disparity between the two is not minor. There is 122 times more energy required to exist for quantum physics theories to function. So where is it all? I mean, that really is what string theory set out to answer. And that answer was that most of it exists non-locally. Most of the energy that is the foundation for our physical reality even doesn't even exist within the physical universe. It exists in non-locality.
Well, by non-locality, I presume you mean outside of space and time altogether.
Yes. And I'm glad you brought that up because, and it's important distinction that this somewhere else is nowhere within the measurable physical universe. It's not part of time, space, or matter. It gives rise to time, space, and matter, but the vast majority of it is elsewhere. So that vast majority of energy exists, according to M theory, in these layer-like brains, they call them, BRANES, not to be confused with the physical brain. And these brains are layers. Each layer has a greater density of energy, which translates to they have higher frequency energies. And various brain sort of scenarios posit that there could be 7 of these brains, 10 of these brains, 5 of these brains, depends on the underlying math. But the idea is that non-locality has a kind of a structure. It's not a physical structure, it's an energy structure. And in the lowest most brain, the one, if you will, even though this doesn't actually make sense in terms of the theory, but the brain closest to our physical universe has within it the template for the physical universe. And that it's the energy in that brain in combination with that template that creates the physical universe. And this is known as the holographic theory or the holographic principle. Popular culture has sort of taken this theory and run with it and imagined that aliens are creating our physical universe and that we are all like lab rats in some horrible diabolical scheme. But the whole theory began with M theory suggesting that the reason why the physical universe can exist at all is because it has the energy and the template existing in non-locality. Now, the most profound, and again, connects well to miraculous healing, but the most profound implication of the holographic theory is that our entire physical universe is being continuously created. So every instant, the entire physical universe is reborn, if you will. And that it's only when the template changes that the physical universe changes. Now, the template obeys laws, so it's not just caprice, but those laws unfold in the way we think of matter unfolding, but where on a deeper level, matter is being created continuously. So this is another way in which to allow ourselves to embrace and believe that instantaneous physical change is possible. And the other key to this is to realize that we have our own template. And in the millennia-long spiritual teachings, that template is called the astral body, or the subtle body, or the light body. And that the astral body is the perfect template for our physical body. And when we change anything in the astral body, then there is an instantaneous change in the physical body. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that all sounds good and fascinating and intriguing, but why then do I almost never change? Why do I not see any instantaneous physical change in my own physical body?
Joseph, before we get into that point, let me ask you a few questions.
Sure, slow me down.
With regard to physics, is it the case that you have a background in physics?
I don't, actually. I would be, at best, considered a lay person, a lay authority in physics. But I have, at the same time, made extensive study of the subject and feel very confident that the descriptions that I'm offering people would be backed up by many physicists. Not all physicists, because even among the physics community, M theory is controversial. String theory even is controversial. Not all physicists agree on what the nature of reality is. But I would say with confidence, again, that there are a large number of physicists who would say that everything I have just presented is true. They probably would not make the leap to our holograph being an astral body. But otherwise, I think, again, I feel confident that they would say the basic principles I'm putting forward are true.
Also, with regard to the double-slit experiment that you described earlier, I was a little puzzled when you said that the photons appear like waves when they're not observed. But if they're not observed, how do we know they appear like waves?
Good question. So the way those experiments are set up, and there are varying ways in which they're set up and what is used to, kind of be measured. So photons was where they sort of began. Since then, they've also been able to send atoms, even molecules, through the double slits and seen the same effect. But the basic experiment runs over time. So if you can imagine the two slits being in a barrier that lets only things to go through the double slits into a closed box, if you want. And at the back of the closed box, there is a detector. And the detector measures where the photon, or in later experiments, the atoms, but let's stick with photons, where the atoms actually struck this physical thing. And what happened, what they observed, was that even though photons were sent one at a time toward this apparatus over a long period of time, and they could go for hours, they could go overnight. They'd turn it on and they'd go away. And they had a apparatus that could send one photon at a time through those or toward those slits. And what they expected to be the result of this when they first started doing these experiments was that they would see on this detector a buildup of photon impacts, if you will, in matching vertical shape, right? That would mirror the slits in the barrier. But they didn't. And this is what blew their minds. What they saw instead is what's called an interference pattern. And an interference pattern was familiar to them because of experiments done with light in other circumstances, or even with water waves. So if you have two concentric circles of water waves radiating out, when they hit each other, when the waves collide, if two waves collide at a point of a crest, the crest gets higher. And if two troughs collide, the trough gets lower. They reinforce and add their energy to the trough or to the crest. And if a trough meets a crest of exactly the same size, they cancel out to nothing. Well, you can set up an experiment that will measure this effect And what you see is not the single vertical impacts that they hope to see, but you would see light and dark bands alternating, on this detector. So that's what they expected to see, but they didn't. They expected to see vertical slits, but they saw this interference pattern. So then they did variations on the experiment to see if they could get the expected result to show up. And they did a lot of theorizing before they devised something that blew their minds even further. They kept trying to find a argument for how the photons had actually traveled literally into the box and then back out the other slit, or many variations on this. So they decided, well, let's at least measure which slit a given photon is going through, and maybe that'll give us the answer. So they put up a apparatus that measured, and it didn't interfere with the motion of the photon at all. It was just a way of knowing which one it went through, which slit it went through. So they set up the apparatus the exact same way they had been for years now. They put the measurement device there, turned the system on, left overnight, came back the next morning, and they saw the vertical impact, sort of craters, if you will, the vertical impacts of the photons that they had expected to see in the beginning. And the only difference was that it had been measured by an intelligent observer. And this became really a huge gaping hole in physics' understanding of reality. And they never did resolve it. They never have actually explained it in mathematical terms. They just kind of leapt over it with quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is a highly accurate mathematical system that allows physicists basically to predict with great accuracy the probability of where an atom is going to be, or a photon is going to be, or an electron is going to be, but still not the exact knowledge of where it's going to be. So this remains one of the core kind of mysteries and debates of modern physics, is why would measuring something, and that measurement can only be done by someone with the intelligence to do the measuring, could make photons behave as matter, or the lack of the measurement, why would the photons, which are a sort of the particle form, the matter form of light to begin with, why would they start behaving as waves of energy?
Thank you for that explanation. That's very clear. So what you're essentially saying is that what we think of as solid matter, the world of the senses, is not the only way to look at reality.
No, it is reality. A lot of people have difficulty when they encounter this notion in spiritual teachings that the world around us is an illusion, because I think they react with the thought, well, does that mean it's nothing? The way I like to describe it is it's just not what it seems. It's a magician's illusion. When the magician shows you whatever trick he is showing you or she is showing you, what you see is not really what it seems. So matter is just not what it seems. Matter is energy behaving like matter, but it is essentially energy which is formless.
Now, when it comes to miraculous healing, I would like to share a little story. A researcher I used to know, she was a skeptic of parapsychology, but quite interested in it. A bioscientist named Lila Gatlin, her father had been a spiritual healer. And she told me, as a child, she remembered an instance, if I recall correctly, they lived on a farm, and someone came to her father who had been in an accident, and his face was all bloody. And she tells me she witnessed this. Her father prayed over this man, passed his hands over the face, and instantaneously the blood was gone. The whole face was healed, like in a moment. And I think when you talk about miraculous healing, you're suggesting something along those lines is actually possible.
Yes. And I think there probably are millions of cases, such as you just shared, that were not verified at the time or were unverifiable because there was no pre-existing condition diagnosed and no care and treatment monitored and no final outcome measured. But I think there are millions of people who have, if not instantaneous healing like that, they heal from diseases that are considered incurable. We just don't know about them because when they are raised anecdotally like that, people think, well, maybe it was just it was a bloody nose and he just got, the blood got wiped off and looked like it got healed. Skeptics can be skeptical of practically anything unless you can get a very, very rigorous methodology in place to measure it.
But one of the issues of spontaneous remission and miraculous healing seems to be that they're not predictable. And I get the impression from your book, you are suggesting that there are practices, meditation exercises, lifestyle changes that at least you might say are more conducive to the possibility of that kind of healing occurring.
Yes, and the practices that I share in the latter half of the book would probably not be a surprise to people interested in the subject. I presented them from the point of view of the science, perhaps more than they might have encountered them before. But the point of all of the practices that I offer are ways to directly influence your own emotions, your own beliefs, and your own soul connection to spirit. Because these are the three keys to our health. And they are also the three keys to miraculous healing. But because we're conditioned to think of the physical body as being this immutable thing, it's hard for people to really believe that something as, nebulous as emotions could, cause them to be unhealthy or cause them to be cured. And the last piece of the physics that I just touched on is this notion that we have our own template. We have our own astral body. And the final connection point there between physics and miraculous healing is that our astral body is completely sensitive to emotions and to our beliefs and to our connection to spirit. So when our emotions change, it changes the astral body. And as soon as the astral body changes, the physical body changes. Now, you might not see it, but over periods of time, consistent positive emotions result in consistent positive health. And there are many, many studies that have been done. It was a 30-year study done at Harvard, starting with a graduating class of Harvard men who agreed to get a medical checkup and a mental and emotional health assessment every year for 30 years. And at the end of 30 years, what they found is that of the 78 men who either died or became seriously ill, all of them had poor mental health. So this is just one of hundreds of correlations. But again, modern medicine has no mechanism for how me being in a bad mood for 20 years could kill me. But if you understand that what your emotions are doing on a subtle level in your astral body are distorting all the life processes that are going on in your physical body continuously for years and years and years, then it's easier to understand how your emotions become so important to your health. Beliefs are even more powerful. There's a lot of evidence that people who are multiple personality disorder sufferers can experience and do experience instantaneous physical change. I think the most dramatic story that I've come across to date is that a woman came to a psychologist in Germany. She's a German woman. And she did so because she thought she had amnesia. This is fairly typical of multiple personality disorder sufferers. She thought she had amnesia because she couldn't remember a lot of what had been happening in her life. And because she was diagnosed with multiple personality disorder, she realized with the help of the psychologist that her memories were spread over 10 different personalities. And the astonishing physiological facet to this is that when she came to the psychologist, she was blind. And she was blind in all 10 personalities. But over several years of therapy, one by one, 9 out of 10 of her personalities began to be able to see to some degree or another. But the 10th never recovered, so to speak. The 10th personality remained blind. Now, this in itself is astonishing, but it's even more astonishing when you realize that if, say, personality 2 moves into personality 10, and personality 2 can see, but personality 10 can't, that in a matter of seconds to minutes, she goes blind, or the other way around. She begins to be able to see. And this blindness was measured neurologically, so it could not be faked. When she's blind, bright lights could be shown in her eyes and there would be absolutely no response in her brain. So this is not, some sort of weird psychological situation where she doesn't want to see or she thinks she can't see. She literally was blind in that personality, but not in others. So what's the difference? Well, in her different personalities, she had different beliefs about whether she could see or not. And in the 10th personality, she always believed that she was blind. But in the other personalities, her belief had come stronger and stronger that she could see.
Well, it seems as if the metaphor you used earlier of the astral body, one might say that each personality had a separate astral body.
Or that the astral body instantly conformed to the belief of that particular multiple personality. So either way, sort of saying the same thing. But the rapidity of the change and the fact that it depends on the belief, the conviction of whoever is in charge of the body at that time, gives us some idea of just how powerful our mind and beliefs are. So the reason I started to mention this earlier, the reason why we don't see rapid physical change for the most part in our own bodies is because we don't have rapid changes in belief about our own bodies. So we're basically continuously creating the same body, but it's kind of locked into how we think our body is. And at a very deep level, these are not surface thoughts. These are convictions that are deeper than conscious that we have. So it takes quite a bit to change them. But once they change for any reason, the physical body will change in conformance with that.
Would you say then that the people who have gone through spontaneous remissions have also gone through a personality change at the same time?
I wouldn't call it personality at that level. And in fact, calling multiple personality disorder, people having different personalities, is kind of a compromised way of describing it, right? They're different, they have different tendencies, but they're all stemming from the same person. So I think it is more just that their beliefs are uppermost. Different beliefs are uppermost in those different personalities. So for us, working on maybe a longer time frame, such as dealing with cancer, a lot of cancer survivors describe their experience as a journey. And by that, they mean an emotional, spiritual journey that involves a lot of coming to the belief that they can be a survivor. So it's nowhere near as rapid as what we see with these startling cases of multiple personality sufferers. But it has that same fundamental connection, which is that by the end of their journey, they believe different things.
Some 30 years ago, I did an interview with Brendan O'Regan, who was at that time, the director of research for the Institute of Noetic Sciences and the co-author of the study you cited that involved combing through the medical literature and coming up with 1,500 cases, as you point out, of spontaneous remission. And I asked him about, well, do these people, are they practicing spiritual disciplines? Are they meditating? Is there something that we can say about their lifestyle that accounted for these changes? And his answer back then was that actually it seemed as almost the opposite from what he could glean from the literature of these cases. The people who had spontaneous remissions, he described them as curmudgeons, that they were stubborn.
Well, I mean, I can see where being a curmudgeon might be a core of that. I mean, if you think of a curmudgeon as someone who's not willing to change their opinions very easily for just about any reason, if you go into having a serious condition of cancer or any other disease that is considered terminal, and you cross your arms and say, it doesn't apply to me, then that belief is going to be more powerful than the beliefs of the caregivers who are telling you that you're probably going to die. So I think there's a core there, but I think more modern literature supports the one of the books that I quote in my book was a survey of 100, well, actually it was more than that, several hundred cancer survivors who survived not just cancer, but what was considered to be terminal types of cancer. And she did extensive interviews with 100 of them. And there was quite a bit of self-change described by those 100 survivors. And some of the key things were taking a look at their own emotional life, trying to develop a positive emotional life, changing their beliefs about what health was and why. And a key for all of them was, or not all of them, but a core key for many was making a connection to spirit, to opening heart and mind to deeper truths of who they really are, and opening the door to a connection to spirit. And those all work together. More positive emotions change your beliefs. Higher beliefs will open the door to spirit. Opening the door to spirit and having genuine experiences in heart of the presence of spirit will change the way you feel and believe. So they're all connected, but they all showed up in this survey that she had done.
I'm also aware of the new field of epigenetics, which suggests that people who hold a positive mental attitude can actually change their genetic makeup, and that can be passed on to their descendants.
Yes. In fact, society is basically, experiencing inertia, thought inertia, where genes are concerned and the power of DNA. Between epigenetics and the discoveries of the sort of limited abilities of the human genome, the idea that our genes and DNA control our lives from birth to death is really been overturned almost completely. And in fact, there have been studies done where people's genome is measured, which tells them at any given moment which genes have been activated and which genes are deactivated. They have found that things like consistent exercise over the course of 3 months can deactivate hundreds of genes that are associated with tumor production and activate hundreds more genes that are connected with positive health outcomes. So there are even studies that indicate we turn off genes that help us sleep, and we turn the genes that were keeping us from sleeping back on in the morning. That our genome is responsive to who we are. We're not made by the genome. The genome is the servant to us. So you can enter life with one set of activated genes and leave it with quite a different set. Identical twins they rarely have the same DNA blueprint, activated genes at the end of their lives as they did when they both came in with identical blueprints. So we change our genes a lot, which basically means what we're wanting, what we're creating from our template needs genes that create health-giving proteins, or sadly, it needs proteins that will cause tumors. Because our astral body can kill us earlier than we might want, just because it is totally responsive to whatever is coming from within us, whatever emotions we're feeling, beliefs we have, connection to spirit or lack of connection to spirit. If that's more negative than positive, it will create poor health for us, as bizarre as that may seem. But the flip side, which is what is really what all alternative health is about, is that we can influence that process and have the body creating health-giving genes and reducing the number of negative genes simply by the emotions, beliefs, and connection to spirit that we make. Now, there are all kinds of other things that we do to help our health, and I don't want to just overlook them. Diet, exercise, and many other things, getting health care, massage, etc. All these are good, but all of them combined will not overcome really negative, deeply held beliefs that you're going to die. Your beliefs are just much more powerful. Your emotions are much more powerful. If you're in a bad mood for 30 years, but you're a daily runner and you have a fantastic diet, chances are you're going to die young, because you are, the analogy was used by someone I know a long time ago. You can't placate a cat with milk while you're standing on its tail. There's just the maintaining cause of your illness, if it's emotional or belief or from deep levels of your being, is negative. All the healthy outward activities that you can do are not going to overcome it.
Well, it's sort of a truism that everybody is going to die. I hear it said, nobody gets out of here alive. On the other hand, in the book to which we referred at the beginning of this interview, Autobiography of a Yoga, quite a bit is said about a great spiritual master known as Babaji, of whom it was said he's been alive for thousands of years.
Yes, remarkable, isn't it? And his is not the only, case or reference made to people who are really long-lived. There are other instances of it. But underlying it all is when you connect deeply to spirit, then you also connect deeply to your own ability to determine your thoughts and beliefs. And if your beliefs allow you to believe that you're going to live for 300 years or you're going to live indefinitely, then you will. But that's a very difficult belief to change. I mean, it's a very fundamental belief that most of us are holding, but not consciously, but holding deep, deep, that we are going to die. So you have to really be able to get well beyond those kind of more limited beliefs to the unlimited belief of immortality before you can make that happen. It's within the power of all of us, but it's not simple. It's not easy. It's not the first thing that happens. More likely, the first thing that will happen is we'll begin to start feeling our connection to spirit, and that will have a positive influence on our emotions. That will have a positive impact on what we believe can happen, but gradually. But moreover, we just feel happier, we feel better, and because of that, our physical health is better.
I think you point out in your book that our beliefs are often conditioned by the people around us, that these things occur in cohorts or groups.
Yes, I very much think that's true. The child's mind, in particular, has no filters. That as a child, we don't have the sort of reasoning capabilities that we develop later in life to sort of say, oh, well, that sounds like a good belief and that doesn't. We just take it in. So early childhood belief systems that we develop have a very long-lasting impact on our lives. But then the company we keep after that either reinforces that, because we do tend to be drawn to people who already think like us, and therefore we end up continuing to think the way we think. So there is a reciprocity there, but it's also the kind of the doorway, the mechanism that'll allow us to change our beliefs is to recognize that and start to deliberately read books, in particular, listen to talks, watch videos of people who have either beliefs that expand on our own or are different than our own. And then, spend more time with people who have unlimited health beliefs. It really will help your own beliefs and therefore help your health.
Well, Joseph Selbie, this has been an inspirational discussion. It's opening up for me, and I hope for all of our viewers, a sense of new possibilities. So I want to thank you very much for sharing your research and your wisdom with me and with the New Thinking Aloud audience.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for a delightful conversation.
You're very welcome. And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here.
Book 3 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a PDF copy or order a beautiful printed copy of issue 6 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine.